Good evening and welcome to the first session by the Consortium of National Law Universities ahead of CLAT 2020. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Sudhir Krishnaswamy, the Vice Chancellor of the National Law School and the Secretary and Treasurer of the Consortium of National Law Universities. Joining me today is Assistant Professor Siddharth Chauhan from Nalsar, Hyderabad, who will help me through this conversation. And given his long engagement with young law students coming into the NLU system, correct me if I go wrong with any of this. So let me start briefly by saying something about the consortium. The Consortium of National Law Universities brings together 22 national law universities across India. We conduct the CLAT exam 2020, but besides this, we engage with a range of initiatives on legal education reform and supporting legal research. And this effort, which many of you are now familiar with, a complete revamping of the Consortium of National Law Universities website, the CLAT exam, the preparation of learning materials, the introduction of sample papers along with some changes in format, is a part of this exercise of investing deeply in the future of legal education. So this YouTube lecture series is a part of this effort. What we're trying to do is to make this range of information and initiatives in the field of legal education, as well as with CLAT 2020, accessible to anyone who can get on the internet at any time and is interested in learning about these exercises. So the first thing that I want to do is to address the theme for this session, and I'm going to take 5 to 7 minutes to do this before I bring Siddharth in and take the conversation in another direction. Sorry about that. The National Law University model is what one needs to understand and what the motivations for this model were. And many of you might know, and some of you may not, that it emerged from a small article, just 5 pages long, written in the Journal of the Indian Law Institute in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, by an associate professor in JNU, in Jawaharlal Nehru University, called Rahmatullah Khan. And he wrote this paper called the National School of Law, a proposal, right? And you can tell, you move the words around and you get the name of the first of these national law schools. This proposal is very interesting and instructive for anyone who wants to understand what the National Law University model is about. So this proposal makes clear that the problem it identifies is the problem of a technocratic legal professional education. It complains about the 3-year law degree, focuses too much on rules and learning doctrinal law, doesn't do enough to sensitize students to the environments in which law is practiced and sensitize students to think about the law in a strongly social, scientific, and humanistic way. As a result, the proposal for by Professor Rahmatullah Khan was to put up a national law school that was situated in a multidisciplinary university. He suggested a 5-year integrated law program. So not just law, not just legal rules and legal doctrine, but also the social sciences and the humanities. Not just a single disciplinary school, but create a multidisciplinary school that would provide students with a liberal professional education. And this was the motivation for the National Law School. Now, as you may know, it took quite some time between the publication of this article and the creation of the first of these law schools. Professor Khan thought that the first of these law schools should be at JNU. He thought this was the place that should engage with legal education in this new way. As things turned out, the first of these law schools was the National Law School in Bangalore. But look at the motivations that were carried out in the National Law School. You have a BA and you have an LLB. The BA introduces you to the social sciences and the humanities. history, economics, sociology, and political science, primarily quite rigorously done, followed up with an introduction to law and further specialization in the field of law. The joining together of the BA and the LLB was the innovation that made the national law schools a great success in legal education. Now, 30 years on, it's fair to say that this model has succeeded in several ways. It's brought a new cohort of young law graduates into the profession. They are better trained on average than most other law graduates across India. They also seem to have a wider spectrum of learning and experience than just law. And this difference is visible. It's visible in the simplest sense that if you ask what are the kinds of careers that law graduates from these various law universities go off and pursue, you will find the widest range of careers. Not surprisingly, many of them join the legal profession, become lawyers, become judges, and that is what our universities are set up to do. And if we are modestly successful at doing what we do, we would train people for the legal profession. So you have a professional career that awaits you at the end of this program. But besides this, many of our students go off and pursue all kinds of careers. Careers in theater and the movies, careers in academia, not academia only in the law. I'm talking about history professors, sociology professors, and so on, as well as careers in civil society and in business. So the 5-year law degree seems to prepare candidates, people who come in, students, to this range of careers. And that is what the NLU experience is about, right? So let me stop there. So it might seem that a liberal professional education is the two don't go together. A liberal degree must be one where you explore all fields of knowledge, you pick and choose what you specialize in, and you ultimately have an open choice. But these programs are focused on producing people who are legally trained and entitled to practice a career of law. To that extent, it might seem that this is a constriction. But if any of you have had the opportunity to come into the national law universities, visit one, get a sense of the kinds of students who are there, the kind of student experience you get by entering a national institution, drawing students from across social classes, across languages and regions, and across various communities. This kind of opening out of the mind is the unique quality to the National Law University education. So let me stop there. I've said a little bit about what the original design of the National Law Universities was, some more about what we have managed to do and how we have tried to put together a liberal professional education. We don't succeed in every way, but considerable progress has been made across 3 decades. And lastly, I've said a little bit about the kinds of careers that students choose moving on from the National Law Universities. So let me stop there and hand over to Siddharth on other directions that we should push along.
Professor Sudhir, thank you for letting me join in this session. As the session goes on, I will try to also raise some of the questions that we are getting from our viewers. But let's begin with an idea that you mentioned in your remarks, and let's try and explain that a little better to our audience. So from the perspective of a CLAT aspirant, usually the education for these programs is funded by parents. You have, of course, some students who will come in on scholarships. So generally, when you look at the demographic of students or the profile of students who are looking at entering these programs, a lot of them do see the program as a professional degree, at least at this stage when they're preparing for it or they're preparing for the exam. So the expression which you used, that the national law schools are actually aiming to provide a liberal professional education, is an idea that perhaps some of us inside the NLUs have not explained adequately to the large pool of applicants. So maybe you for the benefit of our viewers and even the benefit of other insiders like us, it might help to think about this idea that pursuing a program for 5 years in an intensive residential environment is not just about getting the first job. It's also training for life. It's also about the acquisition of long-term skills, which may actually prove to be useful much later in your own respective careers. So maybe a few thoughts on that, since you yourself had studied at National Law School in the 90s, and now recently you have gotten the chance to lead one of the national law schools. So perhaps some thoughts from your side on how this combination of liberal values and a professional orientation can be communicated better to the large pool of aspirants who are looking to enter these law schools now.
So the success of the National Law University model, initially at the National Law School in Bangalore and then elsewhere across the country, has meant that National Law University graduates get placed reasonably well in the world of the law firms, with professional advocates, now increasingly with the judiciary, as well as elsewhere. So professional opportunities are available at the end of the 5-year degree program of various types in the law and beyond. And some people tend to then conflate the only motivation to get in to be the motivation of what you might do when you get out. And I don't want to discount this motivation. Clearly, parents and students make careful choices of careers and investments in those educations that lead to those careers. And I wouldn't dissuade anyone from making that calculation and that assessment. But once one gets in, what is the kind of education that one can expect? Right? It often happens that students get in to the National Law School and then, or to a National Law University, and then find that they are mildly disappointed because what they're expected to do is to read long texts on the history of India, on the sociology of India, understand the history of thinking and evolution of caste politics in India. And there's often a refrain from some students, but we just came here to study the law. And one is puzzled, and students are often surprised that this is the kind of program that they signed up for. So it's useful for all of us who have both been through that system and who now engage that system as faculty, that we communicate this clearly, that indeed the design of the National Law University system and the liberal professional education that it seeks to promote requires this broad-based education. It requires an understanding of self and an understanding of our place in the world before we can say anything useful about the place of law in our society. Professor Madhav Menon, who was instrumental in at least 2 of these National Law Universities, NLS in Bangalore and NUJS in Calcutta, was often used the language of social engineers. And he would say that the NLUs are not meant to just train you to getting a job at the end of 5 years, but they're meant to be training for a career and a lifelong commitment to progressive social change. And now it seems quite quaint and old to be talking like this. But this was Professor Menon's motivation when he set up these law schools. And so I think it's timely, 3 decades on, that we reiterate this commitment. This is what the law universities are about. If we do our job well, this is how we will educate you. And this is what students who are coming into the system must anticipate and expect. The career that you choose when you graduate may not be the career that you stay with even for 3 or 5 years. As often happens to National Law University graduates, they have plenty of options, they try something, and then they quickly move on to explore other options and pursue other careers. And that's the way it should be. And the way we educate in the National Law University system is to educate you for the variety of these careers. the skills that we want to equip you with, the ability to read closely, dense text, to think through arguments, to write well, and to articulate these arguments orally are skills that you can take to a range of careers. And the law is particularly well suited and demanding of these skills. And so these are very relevant skills for legal education. And that's the way you might want to think about how we put together a liberal professional education.
I understand that most of our viewers are probably school-leaving students who are preparing very intensively for the CLAT exam. And to some extent, what we are discussing might be one step ahead because these are concerns of students once they get admitted. But I just wanted to quickly say that I've also now been teaching for a period of 8 years. It's not a very long time. It's not a very short time. And generally, when I try to convey to students that the first and foremost job of the university is to make you a competent and motivated scholar, they very often come back with the same reaction which you had outlined, that we've come here to become professionals. What are you doing about it? So conveying these ideas takes time. Sometimes experience is a better teacher than what the lecturers might say in the classroom. And I'm sure that many of our CLAT aspirants will also possibly engage with these ideas a lot more. And one way of doing that is to also talk to current students. Sometimes it's not enough just to be focused on the exam alone, but perhaps also talk to students who are currently attending some of these national law schools, those who have already graduated, and get a better sense of how they gained from this experience. So Professor Sudhir, my next question to you is actually reflecting not just on an experience that I've had in the last few years of teaching, but also a common concern that many groups have highlighted. As you are aware, the Increasing Diversity by Increasing Access group has done some good work in training students from underprivileged backgrounds to enter these national law universities. Many of them also are supported financially by that group. And one common finding that they are reporting across all the national law universities is that students who have done their schooling in a vernacular medium or students who come from semi-rural backgrounds have a particularly difficult time, both with the CLAT exam and also obviously with the first year of their study. And the common problem that a lot of people seem to be converging on is the emphasis on English. Because obviously, since English is the language of court proceedings, English is the language of commerce and professional opportunity, much of our teaching and curricular coursework tends to be in English. So going forward, both with the content of the CLAT and also with the way in which we are trying to orient our education, how do we deal with this problem? Because India is a country of multiple languages. We have students with different levels of access to English in their previous schooling. And it is a common anxiety, both on part of students and their parents, as to what should be their familiarity with the English language as they approach this exam, and also once they enter the portals of these schools as to how they approach their coursework. So maybe some thoughts from your side on the English language emphasis that is pretty evident in our system.
So I know that this has been long discussed, both within the NLUs and outside. And I think we should start with a few preliminaries that we should make clear. I don't think I would connect the question of the language of the courts to the question of the medium of instruction. Whatever may be the language of the courts, the medium of instruction in the NLU so far has been English. I don't know of any NLU that offers a legal education in a language other than English. So let's be clear that that is where we are. Now, if the proposition is that we should have a language of instruction across the board, across various languages, this is a valuable and important thing to do. But I don't know of a single NLU that is in a position to offer this variety of legal education. So English is the language of instruction. So that's I think an important preliminary to put to rest, because this might generate both unnecessary expectations and unnecessary promise. I mean, unkeepable promises. So now the question of who gets in is not conditional on English, and who gets to do well in a legal in an NLU at the end of a 5-year process is not conditional on just English language expertise. English language knowledge and the aptitude and the willingness to learn it is essential because that it is the medium of instruction, but it is not the only constraint that determines performance. So over the years, as you pointed out, we have attracted students across a range of backgrounds with varied levels of English language ability. And we are very happy that the demography of the law schools begins to reflect the demography of the country more widely. The more representative the NLUs become and more representative the NLUs are of the national population, we will all be, we will make up for a better bar. So representativeness in this sense is something that we will all strive for, and we continue to innovate in that. The question of English language capability for the CLAT exam is that we've always had an English language section, and the entire exam is conducted in the English language. There is no other language. And for CLAT 2020 is no different, right? So, so CLAT 2020 will remain, will retain its English language focus. Is it that the English language is, how could a student who finds that her or his English language ability is maybe not as what they might desire, how do they cope? Clearly, at the NLUs, we should be doing much more. We should be enhancing access to language learning. And I can tell you that for my university, we are pushing in that direction. So in that case, we will put in that effort with you to build English language ability. But this requires some degree of pedagogical patience. It will take time for some students a year, some students a little more than a year or thereabouts, to develop the kind of confidence and ability to work freely with the English language program that we deliver. But we will put in the kinds of resources necessary to make that transition as smooth and as as structured as possible. So that's how I'd respond to the English questions.
Thanks for that honest and pragmatic answer. You're right that we should not create false expectations about the possibility of exams in other languages, because CLAT has so far been in the English language, and it is also the language of instruction in the various national law schools. So before I move on to the other questions which I had, a specific question that is coming from our audience is specifically about general knowledge. Mm-hmm. A lot of students, for instance, seem to be anxious about not only how to prepare for the general knowledge component of the CLAT, but also in terms of its relevance going forward. Why is it important for a law student, for instance, to have a good grounding in national and public affairs, to keep abreast of recent periodicals? So maybe your thoughts on not so much on what we are going to test students on, but why it is important for a lawyer or a law student to be well-read and to be informed of the world of public affairs at large.
So the approach to the general knowledge component of the CLAT exam has varied across the years. In previous years, their focus, the tendency has been to put a diverse set of 20 or 30 questions together, and each question is often not related to the next question. And so students, ostensibly the model was to assess if students knew a little bit about a lot. So we have not done away with this approach altogether. We continue to assess whether students have a broad understanding and sense of the world. Why is that important? Because law is an inextricably public profession. You must know a good amount about a lot of different things that you might have to confront in the world. I'll just give you a couple of examples, maybe that will move us around. For example, if you think about the recent Sabrimala cases in the Supreme Court, I say cases because some are still ongoing. One of the questions being addressed by the court was an intricate theological dispute about the nature of religious practices, beliefs, and history of that particular temple. Now you might ask, does a lawyer need to know something about a small, relatively well-attended temple, but a temple in South India and its religious history and practices? Well, arguably, you might say, no, you just need to know a little bit about constitutional law to decide the case. But as a judge or as a lawyer engaging these kinds of issues, you need to know an awful lot about the history and practices of this religion. This kind of knowledge can only come from a wide embrace of the world, try and learn about the world and its diversity in rigorous ways. Clearly, nobody can know everything about everything, but the point of the general knowledge section is to motivate you with some background information about an area of knowledge, and then assess how you are able to work with that background information and what are the connections you can make from that background information, drawing on the other knowledge that you might have of the world. That is the motivation. I think that motivation is well placed, and in the CLAT context and the NLU education context, well located. So I suppose that I would encourage all students to continue to see that portion of the exam as simply calling on you to engage with all of the world's knowledge in a curious and sensitive way.
I remember when I started as a law student, a very good piece of advice that came from many faculty members was to regularly read the better newspapers. Mm-hmm. So whether it is the opinion pieces in good newspapers like the Hindu or the Indian Express, and their insight was not just to limit the reading to legal pieces, but also to politics, economics, and social affairs, which at the same time help the students in developing their vocabulary. So perhaps that's an actionable step which many of the aspirants can take. That apart from whatever material is available to you through coaching and other resources, also make the effort of reading the print media more regularly and to keep track of the developments from time to time.
So may I just add a couple of things? Reading well and reading carefully and curiously, because what we are looking to engage and encourage students to do is to read very carefully. Why do certain issues become important? What is the background to those issues? Yeah, and it's the connectedness of that knowledge that we want to encourage students to engage with.
I'll move on to one more question coming in from our viewers, and I'll weave it into a question which I had also planned to ask you. So in your initial remarks, you did take the example of the National Law School, which popularized the BA LLB integrated program. But as you're aware, amongst the 22 law schools, quite a few national law schools are offering other combinations as well. For instance, some schools are offering a combination of a BBA LLB, a Bachelor in Business Administration and LLB, and some are offering a BCom LLB. So which means that for quite a few students, when they choose which school they want to attend, they possibly want to get a better sense of how the combined degrees might work. So as you have already outlined, the emphasis in the BA LLB is on the humanities and social sciences. And we have courses like economics, history, sociology, and political science. But what would be your take on students who are still a bit undecided on opting for schools which perhaps offer choices with combinations based on commerce-oriented subjects or business administration subjects?
Sure. So my motivation when I started off this session was to anchor our discussion in the history of the National Law University model, right? And the history of the model is built around the BA. Now, the BCom and the BBA have been further iterations on this model. Some universities even offered a BSc at some points, and I'm not so sure whether anyone offers that currently. Now, I'm less familiar personally with the variety of these models in that I have neither studied nor taught intensively in these various programs. My understanding is the conjoining of a BCom to an LLB or a BBA to an LLB brings the world of commerce and the world of business in conversation with the law program. Is the approach in the BCom and the BBA vocational, or is it disciplinary? I don't know enough. So I suppose that this is the first in the series of the CNLU YouTube podcast, and so others will pick up on these themes. Vice chancellors who thought about these options and implemented them, worked with them. I suppose that my quick response would be that irrespective of whether a law student chooses a BCom or a BBA, I think law students must have the ability to work across a range of disciplines, right? The intuition behind the NLU model is that a singular focus on law and law disciplines is not enough.
I think you're right that since both of us are only grounded in the BA LLB experience, it's probably not right for us to offer strong opinions on that. So the next question is, of course, connected to a part of your remark, but it's something which I already had in mind, that for many students who are at the school leaving stage, attending a 5-year program might perhaps be the first time away from home for them. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are some students who have been to hostels earlier and have a sense of a residential life. But for a lot of the experiences that we have documented in the recent past, life in a residential campus is quite different from, let's say, the protective environment of your parents or the kind of environment which you would have had at the schooling stage. So for a lot of students, there might also be early anxieties in the way in which they adjust to the residential campus. And what advice would you give to a school leaving student who is now looking at the possibility of studying at a location far away from home, in some cases thousands of kilometers away from their family, and what kind of challenges are ordinarily faced in such a scenario?
Okay, so here, I mean, I'm going to start on a humorous note, because the one thing that I think all of you are aware of the times we live in. The COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we have had to empty our colleges. Students have had to leave and go back home sometimes midway through a trimester or early in a trimester, early in the term, and head back home and then study from home. And at least in my university, it's quite striking to see a new nostalgia for living on campus, even among some of the early batches. So it's not a nostalgia that comes with time. It's a nostalgia that seems to arrive pretty early. So my intuition is, I don't know what parents might be feeling and the anxieties that they might feel, but most students seem to embrace the campus atmosphere very readily. I mean, it's an exciting place. There are young people from across the country, very bright and motivated. I think we in the NLUs have to work quite hard to make sure that these spaces are safe and inclusive and protective of our students. And some of us have been putting in efforts across years to try and do this. It's a work in progress. We haven't got there yet in every way. But by and large, I think our campuses are welcoming. Students seem to adapt very quickly to the vagaries of mess food and hostel life, and love that immersive experience that comes from having classrooms just accessible to you much of the time, and libraries and other common spaces similarly available, which is a big change from the schools that they come from, as well as oftentimes home environments. So I think most students, and this is, I trust I'm not wrong, and maybe the comments column will tell me if I am, that most students seem to take in a quite excited way to the promise of hostel life. So I don't think hostel life should be what is generating anxiety in student choice.
And just as a small addition, I felt that some of the best learning actually happens through the discussion with your peers, because you're in class maybe 4 or 5 hours a day. Of course, some law schools have longer schedules, but the fact that you are staying with your fellow students in one location actually gives you the framework to take part in a lot of activities which are far more intensive than what would be in the context of a day college. So you're certainly right. I think many of us owe a lot of our learning to the fact that we had the benefit of studying in a residential campus.
Yeah, and
So
can I just say that the higher and higher education might mean that we move beyond the safety and the cocooned comfort of the home to push ourselves a little bit. Maybe some discomfort, and I'm not discounting the levels of discomfort, but that might be pedagogically instructive for life. Whether it teaches us about the law or about sociology, I hope it does. But at least it teaches us how to live in a diverse world that we inhabit anyway.
Absolutely. So the next question which I had was connected to the concerns about careers. So you of course had flagged in the beginning of your remarks that graduates from the National Law Schools have actually pursued a diverse set of professions, and which is why you came back to the central point that these 5-year programs are offering a liberal professional education. But if I may just offer a simple categorization, which a lot of people sometimes miss, is that broadly careers which flow from these national law schools can be grouped under 3 categories, right? There are careers in the public sector, there are careers which are market oriented, and there are careers which come in the realm of civil society. And a lot of times I felt, not just as a student, but now as a teacher, that we aren't paying enough attention to introducing students to the various career possibilities at the early stages of their study. So I know that this is an exercise in trying to orient CLAT aspirants to the various possibilities that exist for them. But what can be done? What can we do better to communicate that there is not just one possible career path which comes after your 5-year program, not just the path of practicing in court or commercial law firms, but a variety of paths. As you yourself mentioned, among civil society institutions, we can count research organizations, social advocacy organizations, universities themselves. Amongst the public sector, many graduates have done well by qualifying to be judges, qualifying as civil servants. So what can we do better as part of these institutions to communicate that there is this range of options which is available to you? And it's not necessary that you have to lock yourself into the a particular career path early on in your studies. That there is a process of exploration which you have to undergo throughout your undergraduate study.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the national law universities as the NLU system, we can do this a lot better in several ways. I suppose that this conversation that we're having here today is one such way. And if, I mean, you're a graduate of the National Law School, so am I. We're both legal academics, which may not be the most exciting career option that 12th graders want to pursue. But for others, we need to showcase these examples. I suppose many students don't even know that various CEOs and various startups and various serving IS officers at senior positions are graduates from the NLU system. And I suppose that rather than me or you evangelize the potential of the NLU law degree, we should be showcasing these alums directly, so that students are under no illusion of the range of career options that are open to them, whether they choose to be writers or dancers or movie directors. All of this is open and potentially builds strongly on NLU law degree.
Right. So I think now, since we have limited time left, I'll turn to the questions which are coming in the comment section. Sure. Quite a few people are asking about the exam date. I know it's a practical discussion which you need to have as part of the CLAT consortium, but because of the uncertainty surrounding the lockdown, I think a lot of students are concerned about what is likely to be the timeline of the exam. So maybe this is the right forum to address their concerns also.
So, I mean, the addressing of the concern can be straightforward and direct, which is that we have published an exam date. I know that the exam date has been moved twice. And I suppose that anyone who's a part of this conversation knows the exceptional circumstances in response to which the exam date has been shifted. And I think you also know that that first Sunday of May date has been a date for more than 2 decades, right? So it's as far as our own resolute commitment to conducting the exam on a particular day of the year every year, we have stuck to But this situation that we're placed in this year is completely different. And we've got to, establish with absolute certainty that any student who comes to the exam is safe, that we have the protocols that will ensure both sanitization and disinfection of the centers, and a protocol that allows students to come and write an exam in a healthy environment. These are the non-negotiables. I think the date is negotiable, right? Right now we have a date. Nobody has told us that we can't conduct an exam on that date, but we'll have to see what the reality of the world is and be responsive to it. I can just say that there is no whimsicality in choosing the date for the CLAT exam. And we will put out information as and when it's made, decisions are made, with clarity and explanation. So you can rest assured that we have a date. In our current plans, we intend to stick to that date. Unless some supervening influence steps in between now and that date, please take that date as what we will work with.
I'd also like to just clarify to viewers that in the CLAT consortium, the vice chancellors and registrars of all the 22 national law schools are part of the decision making. So a question like that can't simply be answered here in a video session. Once that committee meets and a discussion happens, then certainly the decision will be made public. So before we close, just a last question based on the questions that are coming in from the viewers. Students are, of course, at the moment are focused on the entrance exam. Sure. I know that we have tried to push the bucket a little bit and try to speak about what kind of concerns or anxieties arise during the course of their studies and thereafter. But I think it's only natural that school-leaving students at the moment will be focused on the exam per se. So any specific suggestions on how they can organize their time better as they prepare for the exam? And any specific things they can do to orient themselves better for the exam this year?
So I suppose the general instructions are all available on the website. We have instructions which are on the exam and our approach to the exam, as well as each discrete section. So I'm not going to repeat that part of what's been done. And there are videos and there are sample papers and sample sections. So you would do very well to look at those materials carefully and learn from them. But let me say two things in terms of motivation this year in the modest changes that have occurred to the CLAT 2020 exam. The first is that we don't expect students to learn a discrete body of knowledge which they must come and reproduce in the exam. This is not the motivation for the exam. The assumption is that students are preparing for a legal education. They're not already legally educated. So rest assured that this is not a test of prior knowledge. This is one motivation. This is something we have consistently said, and hopefully the materials that we have put out reflect that. The second is that then you may say, oh, if it's not a test of legal knowledge and I can't study for it or memorize something that will show up on the exam, what should I do? The fact that we don't study for or memorize for an exam doesn't mean we don't prepare for it. You can prepare for the CLAT 2020 and you must, and I'm sure many of you are already engaged in that process. And preparation here means preparing a basket of skills and approaches that will be useful in the exam on the exam day. It is not about covering any specific range of material. I mean, Siddharth has mentioned reading good newspapers, reading good news magazines, and so on and so forth. You don't do that in the anticipation that you can guess what the content of the paper would be. You do that in the anticipation that the practice of reading allows you to get into the system where when you are placed before an essay, you are able to respond to it quickly and accurately. You get used to reading accurately, analyzing the material, and responding to it. That is the kind of exam. So you'll notice now in every exam, we provide you, in every question, we provide you adequate information to work with. You don't have to bring all that information memorized and stored away somewhere. you need to take the paper as you see it and then apply yourselves to it, acutely. That needs preparation because it needs stamina, it needs the ability to read well. All of that are skills that you would do well to prepare for. And so that's all I'd say. So I don't think that CLAT 2020, all said and done, would be very dramatically different from what's come before. It's a difference in emphasis, a difference in accent, but otherwise what is being tested, what we are working with you on, are the same premises, the same motivations that have motivated CLAT across the years.
Right. So I think for now that was the broad range of questions that we had got, and I think I more or less asked you what I had in mind. Mm-hmm. So unless there is some last thought which you want to convey to the viewers, maybe we have a few more minutes if you want to convey some other messages to the viewers.
So my intuition about the CLAT exam and about the preparation for the CLAT exam, what does it call for, right? Because many of our viewers seem to be asking us, coaching centers and beyond, what should our prep approach be? Now, for some of us, as you know, we're very well disciplined. Once we are pointed along a path, we just go out there and do it. We put in the effort and prep on our own. And for a student who's like that, then the consortium learning materials may be adequate, and you might be able to explore and prepare efficiently enough. Others among us might need a more structured process, a coaching center, and there are several of them that do a very good job. Will offer you that structure and that method. It will give you the discipline to put in enough effort consistently to prepare for the exam. Both of these methods might work. I think it really depends on the kind of person that you see yourself to be. What we are clear is that the CLAT 2020, like any other competitive exam, needs preparation, but it is not hostage to any particular strand of preparation. The widest, even I'm saying this quite confidently, that there might be students amongst you who have not prepared at all. You may not even have thought of writing CLAT 2020, and you can write it and prepare now, and you can do exceedingly well. That is the kind of exam it will be. It will assess the background, the years of education and learning and effort that all of us have put in through our school system. Ultimately, if the exam is able to do that, then I think we'd have a very successful exam. This is not a source of anxiety. That we must be able to, there's no need for anxiety with the idea that this is the range that we need to know. Competitive CLAT 2019 was no different. It too tested this wide range of learning. So that's what will be called on CLAT 2020, and that's what I'd encourage you to prepare for.
Right. So I think that seems to be the broad set of concerns that we have encountered so far. From my side, I've just asked you some generic questions, but a couple of takeaways which I think I'd like to highlight before we end this session would be that, yes, English language is a barrier when it comes to legal education in India. But as Professor Sudhir has clearly outlined, the skills of comprehension, writing or speaking, which are necessary to do well in studying law and succeeding later, can actually be developed. So it's not that it's a barrier that cannot be overcome. And we have many examples, not only of our own immediate peers and friends, who have actually enhanced their skills as they studied through and have done exceptionally well in their careers. Another important takeaway, which I think I should flag before we close, was that the experience of education should not just be oriented towards the immediate short-term results. The experience of education is about exploration, about asking difficult questions of yourself, about learning to mingle with people from other cultures. As Professor Sudhir mentioned, that even in the national law universities, you will meet people from different states, different religious backgrounds, people with different viewpoints. And given the kind of cultural or political context that we are, I thought it would be perhaps appropriate to end this discussion by thinking about the idea of civility and the way in which we bring a certain notion of civil decency into not only our public and professional communication, but also the way in which we interact. For example, be it on this forum, where we are trying to have a conversation which we think may be partially useful for aspirants as they plan for the entrance exam, but also going forward, the very process of learning or engagement is premised on the idea that we can be respectful of other people's views despite differences in backgrounds or ideologies.
Okay.
So I think we'll close there, and the CLAT 2020 team will get back to you with more interactions or which may help you prepare for the CLAT exam.
Thank you, Siddharth, and good night.